Great. So welcome, everybody. Here we are at the second part of our four-part series on the history and development of the Jewish calendar through time. Last week, we looked at the big picture of the layers of the calendar as it developed, and then dived into the Torah's accounts of various calendars. We're going to pick that up again in a second. Today, our session is called Pagan Roots, and we're going to be discussing what makes a calendar pagan and in what ways the Jewish calendar, as it was developed by the rabbis, retained its focus on what we could call pagan themes, and in what ways those were modified or muted. So, as you might recall, the Torah gives us 5 different versions of the holiday cycle. These are quite distinct from one another, and none of them contains all the holidays that we now think of as being the biblical level of holidays. What we celebrate is something of a composite. However, I did a little bit. I don't know if anyone took the time to read through those 5 different calendar cycles. And if you did, or if you're just generally knowledgeable, I'm curious what you saw as the through lines or remarkable features of those calendars. And I think you should be able to unmute yourselves, or you can just put it in the chat as you prefer. I made a spreadsheet, which I'm going to try and actually get sent to your computers, because apparently this needs access. You need to get my permission to have access, which I'm not sure I can give you right now. However, you can get my full analysis later by looking at the spreadsheet. I'll tell you what I see as, okay, so now I'm getting you one by one asking me for access. I don't know how to manage sharing. Hang on, let me just see if I can share it with everybody. I don't know, hang on, I want to be able to just share it with everybody. Manage access, let's see. People with access. General access. It says that anyone who has the link should be able to open. So in any case, I will share with you what I see as being the through lines of the calendar. The links in the chat here. So most of them are based in actual events, actual outside events, not human ones, right? So they lack dates. Often, the dates have to do with activities, like when the harvest is done, that sort of thing. So as we'll be seeing, the idea that Sukkot falls on the full moon, or even that Pesach falls on the full moon, is not there in the earliest calendars. It seems to be more contingent on agricultural phenomena, and what we lack is dates. The other thing that we see is that the real emphasis is on offerings. How you worship God correctly at these times, with the earliest calendars having a strong emphasis on blood, a development of interest in bread, not just blood, but bread over time, and the worship becoming systematized into a set calendar of, two lambs, one in the morning, one in the evening, these bulls, etc., etc., and a public shrine where you have a priesthood who are making these offerings at the right time, as opposed to the earliest calendars, which are all about individuals bringing their first fruits and the best of their produce. And the other thing which is interesting to note is how relationship to place changes over time. What we end up with in Deuteronomy with, the place that God's going to choose his name to dwell. At first, we have no what's the word? Designation of place, and in the Numbers, in the Leviticus and Numbers texts, which I suspect are the latest of these calendars, it actually doesn't mention where these things are supposed to happen, other than it's at the shrine, or it's implied that it's at the shrine. I'll give everyone access in just a sec. So this is the first thing I wanted to pick us up on. The other thing I think is important to notice is it really seems like the spring holiday, which is described as being Chag HaMatzot in all cases, actually not called Chag HaPesach. The Pesach is the sacrifice, but the holiday is the holiday of matzahs, and it starts. So it's sometimes actually designated as a different day from the day that you give the Pesach sacrifice. All of these calendars seem to see the Moed Chodesh Aviv, the holiday that happens in the spring month, as being the linchpin of the calendar. Not just that it starts there, but it usually has much more description, usually gives more reason for this holiday. It's described as being to do with the Exodus. In all cases, except very interestingly in the calendar in Leviticus, where we get much more actually about the fall holidays. This is the place where we get instructions about the 4 species that we wave on Sukkot. Pesach is not told that it has anything to do with the Exodus, but Sukkot is. It says, but that's where we get this line, because I made you dwell in Sukkot when I brought you out of Egypt. In any case, the Exodus from Egypt seems to be the organizing idea in all of these calendars. Okay, so that's my first question. First thing that I just wanted to review with you. The second topic and first real question is, what makes a calendar pagan? Why not to taking the pejorative connotation? For some people, the word pagan can be pejorative, others not at all. But I don't mean this in any sense pejorative. What is quote unquote pagan or earth-based in this calendar? Right, okay, it's based on the sun and moon. So it has to do with natural phenomena, natural observable phenomena. What else? Can you guys unmute yourselves, or are you stuck typing? I think you can. What else makes this calendar? Oh, yeah, Jackie.
No, I was just listening.
You were just checking if you could unmute yourself. Great. Esther?
Just checking I could unmute.
Okay. But come on, folks, what beyond being based on the sun and moon, how is the Jewish calendar? The Jewish calendar is like is an earth-based calendar. What else? What are the emphases within it? Sylvia?
Well, I am not sure, but I think perhaps what makes it unique is that one, we have 5 New Years. I like that. I mean, that's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have 1 New Year. And the other is that our calendar, which is a lunar, but it's a tide. We're always tied to a specific event that we've read about in Torah. It's always tied to something specific.
Okay, great. We'll come back to that. So yes, the idea that it has this sort of agricultural layer, but then it has this overlay of an idea from our mythic history as well. Beyond the fact that it's based in the sun and moon, we'll see about the 4 New Years in later in this source sheet, which maybe you haven't got yet. I would say the very fact that it's agricultural, that we're celebrating the harvests, It's very much organized around the harvests and bringing the first of your produce, the best of your produce, and dedicating it, presumably in the hope of next year also giving you good produce. The big holidays are therefore also in the spring and fall, namely the beginning and the end of the growing season, unlike our Gregorian New Year, which happens in the middle of the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. And we'll see that it has echoes of both the Babylonian and the Canaanite calendars that were extant at the time that our calendar was developing in the biblical period. The other thing, clearly has strong elemental practices. We make these offerings by fire, also offering incense, which is a air offering, and we use water pretty significantly in we use liquids. We use wine and oil and blood, but we also use water at some key points in our rituals, including immersion in water in preparation for making offerings in the case of the priesthood, and so on and so forth. So we've got these sort of elemental ties. The other thing that I want to draw our attention onto now is the extreme importance of rain.
Yeah.
So in today's class, we'll be looking at the rain. We'll be looking at the moon, and how the rabbis developed each of these things, the biblical relationship with rain and how it developed, and then the biblical relationship with the moon and how that developed. And then we'll look at the way that elements are in balance. We have ideas of seasons, what you were mentioning before, Sylvia, of the lunisolar, the fact that our calendar is not a free lunar calendar, but rather needs to be connected with the seasons, and the ways in which some of the earlier rabbinic texts give us a rhythm of the year that's based around the seasons. So I'm going to ask Madalena to share the source sheet, and I'll also put the link in the chat again so that folks can. And I'll send out this spreadsheet to your email. I was trying to save it as a PDF or an Excel document, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So, thank you. One thing we see right away, and I'll just make a bracha for us in Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'harevna Adonai Eloheinu divrei Torah b'finu v'fi amcha beis Yisrael anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzei kol amcha beis Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lamdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, great teacher, who is giving us this transmission and allowing it to flow through us from our ancestors to our descendants of body and of spirit. So here we see in the book of Deuteronomy this emphasis on the importance of rain to this land, whereas Egypt, as it says elsewhere in the Bible, is nourished by the floodplains, by the Nile's flood each year. The land of Canaan, Israel, is dependent on rain, and so, as we'll see, the behavior of the people and all of these workings are very concerned with God sending the rain. Otherwise, there's not going to be anything to eat. We, as I mentioned last time, Madalena, could you scroll down for us? I don't have control over this screen share. Great. So as I mentioned last time, there's this idea that the river cultures bring in the spring after the snow has begun melting and the rivers fill, whereas the Canaanite religion expressed the transition from season to season mythically in terms of their primary deity, Baal or Hadad, the storm god, who brings the rain and causes the soil to be fertile. In another class, we could look at all the ways in which Yud-Heh Vav-Heh is also considered a storm god. This mythic connection we see actually pop up in the Mishnah in Baba Batra, where a field irrigated by the rain is just called Sidei Baal, not being used to talk about Baal. It's just that's what it was called at the time. An irrigated field, a field irrigated by the rain is called a Sidei Baal. So we see this sort of echo in the Mishnah, which was definitely not trying to inscribe the worship of Baal. And I've given you a link to the article from which this comes, which is pretty interesting. You can have a look. However, I also found another article, also on Torah.org, which actually problematizes this a little bit, saying that Mesopotamia actually also seems to have had two New Year holidays, exactly as we do, one in the spring, one in the fall. And it goes on to describe the Akitu holiday as possibly falling in. So there are some records of it falling in the spring, but other records of it falling in the fall with the same ritual, or at least the same major ritual elements. So just scroll for us again, Madalena. Sorry, keeping you on your toes. And I put the link. Yeah, keep going. One thing interesting to note here is that word anu was first fruit offering, and tishratu, from which we get Nisan and Tishrei, means beginning. So both of them, like our calendar, and the spring. This emphasis on rain we see really, really strongly connected to Sukkot, and there's two different texts. That's funny. One. Did we skip Meir? Oh yeah, could we scroll back up a teeny bit? Sorry. Yeah. So the symbolism of the four species, Rav Meir Spiegelman talks about how each of the four species that so when we take the lulav and etrog and we shake it in the 7 directions, up, down, forward, back, left, right, and towards our hearts, it makes a wonderful sound, especially if you're in a room full of people taking the four species. And that sound is not unlike the rain. And for anyone who's ever been to Hoshana Rabbah ceremonies at the end of Sukkot, where the ends of the we shake the lulav for the last time and then take the willows and beat them against the ground, it really makes the sound like a rainstorm. And the air is also filled with this wonderful smell, rather than like the very special like sense of the air being pregnant with something, like around a rainstorm. The species themselves have been connected by various thinkers to different types of water, and it's not much of a stretch to say that this is a water summoning ritual of some sort. So Rav Meir Spiegelman points out that the etrog doesn't need a natural water source. It's a tree. It's a fruit tree. Once its roots are securely attached, it can get its own water. The palm, however, needs to grow near some sort of oasis or fountain. The myrtle or hadath depends on rainwater to grow, and the willow symbolizes water in brooks and streams. And then and all of this is symbolizing divine providence as manifest through water. And then Rabbi David Seidenberg, the author of the wonderful Neo Chassid website, a great teacher of ecology in Torah, this is the next source down, points out that the species also map to different habitats in Israel. So the etrog or Prietz Hadar grows in the lowlands and agricultural land. The lulav, the palm, as you might suspect, grows in the desert. The hadass, myrtles grow in the mountains, and the arava grow in the rivers and the river corridors. So together, he says the four species make a kind of bioregional map of the land of Israel. And I saw this, his comment is in the current conservative Machzor, and I couldn't, this is me summarizing what he says, rather than his exact words, but when we take these four species together, what we're doing is presenting an embodied, a physical, the reification of the map of last year's rainfall, and using it to pray for this coming year's rainfall. Okay, so this is the biblical treatment of rainfall. We see this gets developed a lot by the rabbis of the Mishnah. Scroll down for us, will you, Madalena? Sorry, I'm on an iPad and it makes it tricky to screen share and be on Zoom at the same time. A little further. Okay, so Mishnah Ta'anit, you can look at it in Hebrew if you can, or in English if you can. Let's pause there. Yeah, that's good. Up a bit. So we don't have time to read the whole thing now, but the first chapter of the Mishnah of Ta'anit means fast day, describes, it starts by saying, from when do we start to pray for rain? And there's a little bit of a debate, but basically it comes down, as our tradition does, with you start to really pray for rain at the end of Sukkot. Then they say, well, you start to really pray for rain after all the pilgrims have made their way home. So this is where our December 4th, where we really, we start putting prayers for rain into the Amidah. And we finish praying for rain at Pesach, because you don't want rain to fall once the crop is coming up. That can ruin the crop. You want the rain to come in the winter. You don't want the rain to come in the spring and the summer. That can be a sign of a curse, as they say. But then what's really interesting, starting in the fourth section of this Mishnah, they begin to describe how, the fourth Mishnah of this first chapter, they begin to describe how if the rains haven't started to come by a certain date, they start imposing public fasts. And those public fasts increase in frequency and severity as the time goes on, if the rain still hasn't come. So if we get to the 17th of Cheshvan, the month after, like basically a month after Sukkot, if there's still no rain, then you begin to get individuals to fast 3 fasts. And they describe, step by step how what the restrictions are. And it also is not just that people are told not to eat or drink between daybreak and nightfall, but also there's restriction in commercial activity, and there's restriction in pleasures. It's rather like everyone's put into a state of collective mourning. So it gets to the point where if these fasts if these dates have passed and there's still not been rain, and you can read for yourself the full calendar of how this thing works. This is the last section of this Mishnah, number 7. It says, if these fasts have passed and they have not been answered, but the entire community takes on customs of mourning. They decrease their engagement in business transactions, in building and planting, in betrothals and marriages, and in greetings between each person and his fellow, like people who have been rebuked by God. Individuals, which is to say Torah scholars or perhaps the leaders of the community, resume fasting every Monday and Thursday until the month of Nisan ends. And then after this date, they no longer pray for rain, because you actually don't want the rain to come. That's too late by then. Okay, so as we can see, the rain is incredibly important. And for the rabbis, they encourage the people to be really, really focused on the rain. Through these fasts, this kind of focusing of collective intention, collective energy through practice. And as we know, nothing focuses us quite like not being allowed to eat, but also through prayer, which is the other great innovation of the rabbinic period, is having a fixed liturgy. So you'll see in the first couple of sections of this chapter, the additions to the liturgy, which are inserted to pray for rain. Now, in our next Does anyone? I'm gonna see if anyone wants to say or ask any comments on this. All right. Well, I will keep talking. Oh yeah, was that a hand? Is that a hand, or you're just waving? Yeah.
Yeah. When we're not praying for rain, we're praying for dew. Is that messianic also?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There's the idea that God's dew is a constant blessing and is good year round, as opposed to the rain, which you don't want once your crop has started to come up. Okay, so I've already mentioned topic number 2, moons, that that we, this idea of the full moon being the time to celebrate Pesach and Sukkot isn't there in the earliest texts. It does seem to have arrived by the calendars that we get in Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28, which are the more sacrificial, more sort of centralized sacrificial rites, suggesting to me that these are later. I think biblical criticism tends to think that P, the priestly author, is the latest of the biblical strata, or the strata of the Torah. What we do remember from our famous verse like this, HaChodesh Hazeh Yeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, this month to be for you the first month, is this emphasis. There's a famous midrash which says when God says this new moon, it's like actually pointing at the moon and teaching Moses about that direct observation of the moon. What we're going to see is that this direct observation is seriously compromised, or over time the rabbis really move away from wanting people to directly observe the moon themselves. You might remember, a la Lord of the Rings, this idea that when the court in Jerusalem would accept the testimony of witnesses who said that they saw the new moon, they would light signal fires, and then at the tops of mountains, and then people would pick it up and light signal fires, and they would be able to spread the news this way, which is amazing, except for the fact that, like, surely it's much easier to just see the moon. Everyone can see the moon; it's right there. And indeed, the problems with the signal fires were that you could only spread the news a certain amount of time, a certain distance, which is why we have this idea of having 2 days of Chag in the diaspora, far enough away. They weren't sure that they were getting the message in time. If you just let people observe the moon for themselves, you would not have this problem. However, the ability to decide the calendar is a very important political. It's a site of power to be the people who decide both when the new moon is declared and therefore when the holiday will fall. Well, the holiday of Rosh Chodesh itself, which in the rabbinic period becomes a holiday, a half holiday, with the saying of special prayers and certain alleviations of other practices, less mourning, for instance. But also the court had the power to declare when the year would be intercalated, meaning when you would need the 13th month of the year in the spring. Originally, this was not decided in advance. For us, we know when we're going to have a leap year. And I put a link to a very interesting article which gives the whole history of the move of the development of the science of intercalating the year and the change over time from being a calendar that was directly observed, and then in the Mishnaic Talmudic period there was some tension between it being directly observed and being calculated. You might remember there's a famous story I think it's in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, of the witnesses coming to describe the moon, and Rabban Gamliel had a chart that he would check against, of what the moon's supposed to look like, where it's supposed to rise and what it's supposed to look like. So there was already some amount of calculation, and they were checking the eyewitnesses against what they knew ought to be happening. And then over time, partly for reasons of holding political power of, the kosher Jewish, what was becoming Judaism, the kosher ways of calculating the calendar versus various other groups like the Karaites and the Sadducees, who were calculating in different ways. And then eventually under political persecution, they decided that the best thing to do would be actually to let everybody else know how to do the calendar themselves, because it was becoming impossible for the exilarch, which was the leader of the Jewish community in exile, to have enough power to actually do the thing of deciding the calendar and promulgating that. I also read in this article that it became too dangerous at one point, there was such repression of any sign of practicing Judaism, that it became too dangerous to intercalate and promulgate the intercalation of the extra months where we put it usually, which is to say before the spring, which is to have a second Adar. And so it was put before Elul. There was a second Av at some points in history, which I'd never heard before. It's pretty interesting. Julian, you mentioned before the text about the 4 New Years. So we'll take a little look at that now. What's something interesting? We think of our Jewish calendar. We have, as I mentioned, a special status for Rosh Chodesh, the new moon. It has certain extra prayers. It was, at least in ancient times, observed as a women's holiday. So we have, and certain of our holidays, notably Rosh Hashanah, fall on a new moon. But a lot of our holidays, Pesach and Sukkot, being the biblical ones, fall on full moons. We also have these 2 holidays of Tu B'Shvat and Tu B'Av. Tu means 15th, so that is the full moon. The 15th of Shvat, the new year of the trees. The 15th of Av, which we'll see it has biblical origins, but is definitely discussed in the Mishnaic period as a day of joy and of matches being made. Some sort of full moon dancing in the fields festival with women wearing borrowed white clothing. And then, of course, we have the later holiday, well, later than the Torah, earlier than the Mishnah, of Purim, which falls at the full moon. So we might think of our calendar as being more interested in full moons, but interestingly, in our first Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, so it's the very beginning of the whole topic of New Year's, we describe what we're told is that there are 4 days in the year that serve as the New Year. And I don't know if you can still see the screen being shared. Perhaps. Yes. Let's scroll down. I think it's just the next, moon. Keep scrolling a little bit. So yeah, here we are. Mishnah Rosh Hashanah 1:1. There are 4 days in the year that serve as the new year, each for a different purpose. The first of Nisan, so a new moon, is the new year for kings. And it's from this date that the years of the king's rule are counted. And the first of Nisan is also the new year for the calendar, basically, for the order of the festivals. On the first of Elul is the new year for animal tithes. So any animal that's born before that date is counted in the previous year. Any animal that's born after that date is counted in the following year in terms of its age. It has under or over a certain age to be offered. So this is about tithing. But Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, actually, we want this to be on the 1st of Tishrei. Again, both new moons. On the 1st of Tishrei is the new year for counting years. This is our idea of Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. This is how we count when the sabbatical and the Jubilee year will begin. And it's also considered the new year for planting, which has to do with the tithing of fruits and vegetables, basically. And then finally, the first of Shabbat is the new year of the tree. Again, it's like a tax year. If it bears fruit before the state, then it's in the old year for tax purposes. If it's after the state, it's in the new year for tax purposes. And this is what Beit Shammai says. As we know, Beit Shammai, we usually don't do what they say. We do what their academic rivals Beit Hillel says. Beit Hillel says, actually, no, we put it on the 15th of Shabbat, which is where we celebrate it now on the full moon. So all but one of these dates is a new moon date, which I think is interesting. Like when, there's clearly some shift over time from emphasis on new moons, which, as I mentioned last time, there are various dates which are given in Torah for when a certain sort of revelation occurred, happen on the new moon, not the full moon, which is interesting. A shift over time from a preference for the dark phase to the preference for the very bright phase of the moon. Curious. Now, the last thing that I wanted to focus on in this class was how the elements are in balance. So as it's already been remarked, we have this lunisolar calendar, and we have sort of traces of this in early biblical thought, even in the very beginning of Genesis, where God puts a big light and a small light in the sky and says, these are to be l'otot u'lemo'adim uliyamim v'shanim. These are to be the signs for seasons, moed, or holidays, and for days and for years. So both the sun and the moon, it's implied by this comment in Genesis, the sun and the moon together are what you're going to use for calculating time and the observation of time. And we also have that wonderful line in Psalm 104, Baruchi Nafshi, that the moon was created for the seasons or for the holidays, the Mo'adim again. Shemesh Yadam Vo'ah, the sun knows when it should come into play. It's translated as the sun knows when to set. Again, the moon and the sun are sort of playing nicely together. I mentioned last time the Book of Jubilees. Book of Jubilees is ancient, but it ends up in the Apocrypha for the Jews. It's not one of our canonical books. It's written, well, no one really knows exactly when, but it could be as early as 460. They say it's dated between 460 BCE and 60 CE. So the same, really much the same period as the Torah the Tanakh is being redacted. They say probably 2nd century BCE. It tells the history, it tells the biblical history in cycles of 49 years. So it's very interested in time. It gives a lot of dates for things that we don't record dates for. And it, in some cases, gives us sort of like retellings which agree with the Torah and the Midrash, and in some cases gives completely other versions of stories. It's framed as being a Midrash that Moses receives from an angel as he's on Mount Sinai. So similar to the idea of the Torah, or for that matter, the rabbinic idea that the oral Torah is also revealed at Mount Sinai. This is direct revelation on Sinai to Moses, and it is on Sepharia, despite the fact that it's not canonical. It is on Sepharia, and as I said, they're very, very interested in dates and passages of time. The authors of the Book of Jubilees, and it's called the Book of Jubilees because it organizes history in these 49-year cycles. And from here we get an early introduction to the idea that there are 4 new moons of the year that mark the beginning of 4 seasons. It says, let's scroll down just a little bit, Madalena. A little bit more. Here we are. A little higher. Yeah, we go. Yeah, there we are. So it says, on the new moons of the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th months, which is what we call Nisan, Tammuz, Tishrei, and Tevet. These are Hema Yemei HaZikaron. These are days of remembrance, Yemei Chag, and days of, well, the word Chag we think of as meaning holiday or festival. It literally means something that goes round and round, but days for marking the cycle. But Arba Tukufot Hashana, at the 4 Tukufot of the year. You might remember that the word Tukufa, or turning point, was used to describe the season at which what we call Sukkot falls. It means turning point, and in modern Hebrew, actually I think in Rabbinic Hebrew, it means both solstice and equinox, because these are the tipping points, right? Here, it doesn't mean solstice or equinox, but it does mean the turning point of season to season. So the first of the first month is the beginning of spring, the first of the 4th month is the beginning of summer, the first of the 7th month is the beginning of autumn, and the first of the 10th month is the beginning of winter. You'll note that where winter or whatever begins, it may already be somewhat in evidence. There's an interesting parallel in the UK where I'm from. We considered the 21st of June to be midsummer, since it is, the summer solstice. Here in the United States, that is called the beginning of summer, which presumably reflects the different climate, that it is earlier in the summer relative to how long the summer lasts in North America relative to England, where summer is a briefer affair, perhaps. But in any case, this layer of seeing the four passages of the year, we also see reflected in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is much later but is considered canonical. It's an early midrash from the beginning of the Common Era. Here again, you'll see this description of these Tukufot of Nisan, Tammuz, Tishrei, and Tevet. This is the next source down. You'll see that by now the months are being called by their names as opposed to their number names. And you'll also see if you look in the book of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, you'll see it's extremely astronomically, like it's written by and for people with quite a knowledge of astronomy. So they're talking about where in the sky the different constellations are when these new moons occur. And this is just one little section, but if you read the whole chapter, there's a lot of astronomical calculation, which I don't have the knowledge to understand, but they're expecting whoever's reading their book to know something of what it means. The final thing that I wanted to bring you is how this idea of these 4 tekufot then gets developed first in the Talmud, and then has this beautiful renaissance in our days with a wonderful book, which I'm sure Judith, which is Rabbi Jill Hammer's Jewish Book of Days, which is Rabbi Jill is extremely knowledgeable in rabbinic legend, and what she's done in this book is found something to teach about every single day of the Jewish year, with some reference to something that happens in the Torah and or a midrash or piece of Talmud that connects to that and develops it. I'll say more in a minute, but she, like this passage from the Talmud, take as their foundational text another description of time that we get near the beginning of the Torah, namely when Noah comes out of the ark and God says this thing about, now I know that human beings are a bit problematic, but I'm not going to destroy the earth again, at least not with water. And then God says this thing in Genesis 8:22. Can you scroll down a little bit more? Thank you. A little bit more. Yeah, here we are. Od kol yomei haaretz, forevermore shall these be the days of the earth. Zera v'kitzir v'kor v'cham v'kayetz v'charef v'yom v'layla lo yishbotu. Seed time and harvest, cold and hot, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. Will never take a Shabbat. Literally, will never stop working. So this is God's assurance that there will always be this rhythm, this pattern to the way that time and the seasons work on the earth. Then this idea is developed in Baba Metzia in the Talmud, and I won't read the whole thing, but basically they take this verse and they divide the year into 6 sections, and ascribe each of them to as being a seed time, winter, cold, harvest. They take them out of order, and the sections are not the same length, which are interesting to notice. So the sort of majority opinion is that half of Tishrei, all of Cheshvan, and half of Kislev is called seed time. Half of Kislev, all of Tevet, and half of Shvat is called winter, and so on and so forth. And then you get a minority opinion, which breaks it up a little bit differently. And this is Rabbi Jill's jumping off point for how she organizes the Jewish Book of Days, which, you know, there are several pages of introduction that I would really love to bring you, but it's too much. If you don't have the book already, it's really a great one for your library. But Madalena, scroll down a little bit for us. What Rabbi Jill says is this passage from Baba Metzia is interesting for 2 reasons. First, because Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe is willing to divide months to make his seasons correspond to the changes he perceives in nature. We're a little bit lower down on the source sheet. And secondly, because the sages cannot agree on exactly what the 6 seasons are. Each sage begins seed time in a different place depending on his own tradition and experience. And then she goes on to say, if we look carefully at the Jewish calendar, another possible interpretation of Genesis 8:22, this is the bit we just read with God speaking to Noah, appears. This is another midrash on Jewish time. In fact, the words the divine speaks to Noah contain 8 phases: seed time, harvest, cold, heat, summer, winter, day, and night. The sages of the Talmud ignored day and night as irrelevant. But what if we interpreted those phrases more metaphorically and saw them also as seasons? And so the way that she has organized this book, she says the 4 new moons begin the 4 seasons, as we saw from Jubilees and Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. And then we have what the pagan calendar calls the cross-quarter days, which means roughly the balance point. So if you think of the year as having the solstices and the equinoxes as the 4 major balance points, then the cross-quarter days are your diagonals, basically. So if it's like, so if you say the solstices are midnight and 6, and your equinoxes are 3 and 9, then your cross-quarter days are 1:30 and 4:30 and 7:30 and 8 and 10:30. Am I getting that right? Yeah. So the cross-quarter days actually are from what we can tell, what were originally celebrated in most pagan calendars, more so than the solstices and equinoxes in the European pagan calendars. And for like neo-pagans, they also celebrate the solstices and equinoxes, but they used to be more interested in these cross-quarter days, which is where the original interest was in the cross-quarter days, which is a more subtle shift, but where you start to move from it being like the depths of winter to like the first intimations that spring the spring equinox is going to come. And so in our calendar and other calendars, sometimes this basically gets put on the full moon, which is closest to that balance point. So both Tu B'Shvat and Tu B'Av, the full moons I mentioned before, the 15th of Shvat, the New Year of the Trees, the 15th of Av, the Jewish Valentine's Day, are the sort of full moons near those balance points. And then there are also, at least as Rabbi Jill understands it, the 15th of Cheshvan, which is a traditional celebration of the tomb of Rachel, days of pilgrimage to the tomb of Rachel, and also Lag BaOmer, she sees as being the balance point between spring and summer. So the way that she breaks down the calendar, she says one possible midrash on this verse in Genesis is Tishrei and the first half of Cheshvan. This is called seed time. The second half of Cheshvan and all of Kislev, this is called night. Tevet and the first half of Shvat, that's where we are now. This is called winter. Second half of Shvat and Adar, this is called cold. Nisan and the first half of Iyar, this is called harvest. Second half of Iyar and Sivan, this is called day. Tammuz and half of Av, this is called summer. Second half of Av and Elul, this is called heat. You can see how she's drawn those, the words from Genesis. And she goes on to map these, she says, corresponding to 8 parts of the tree, the seed corresponding to seed time, the root buried in the darkness of the soil, the branch laid bare in winter, the sap beginning to run in the cold season, the bud emerging to be harvested in its time, the leaf drawing in the light during the long days, the flower beginning to fade in the summer sun, and the fruit ripening in the heat of summer. The Jewish Book of Days is structured around these 8 stages of growth, honoring the words of Isaiah 65, like the days of a tree shall be the days of my people, which is rather beautiful. And then Madalena, if you could, can you scroll down for us so that we can see this image? Maybe we actually lost Madalena. I'm not sure I have the right to share my screen. Let's see. No, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm scared to try and share my screen. Okay, unfortunately I can't scroll this, but if you open the source sheet in your own machine, you'll be able to see her very intricate, just hold it up to you, intricate diagram mapping the different cycles of the year against one another in a way that actually looks rather like the rings of a tree. I brought this because I think this is a wonderful sort of contemporary reemergence of seeing the Jewish calendar through the lens of the natural world, and because her understanding of the calendar is second to none of anyone I know or have studied with. So if you're really interested, and many of these sources I learned about through reading this book, so I highly recommend going to check it out yourself if you're interested in this kind of material. Okay, I spoke a lot. There's a little bit more on the source sheet that we didn't cover, but I just want to give us a couple of minutes to respond. Is there anything that anyone would like to say or ask? Yeah. Anyone? Sorry, it's a bit of a lightning dash for a lot of material. One of the challenges of Zoom teaching is we don't always get as much conversation going as we might if we were in person. I see you, other Gershuny, thinking about saying something. No? No. Okay. All right, well, I'll just then give a little plug for our next the next session, where we'll be looking at the holidays that developed really after the time of the Torah, but become firstly we'll be looking at the High Holy Day cycle, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we'll also be looking at the days of commemoration surrounding the destruction of the temple, as well as Purim and Hanukkah. So all of these are, in a way, I think, wrestling with both history and eternality. How I like to think of it, of time beyond time, and how we deal with having a calendar which is subject to the depredations of history. So this is our next move. We'll be together again, same time, same place, next week. And I will send to Rabbi Tilchen the documents that we used today, and I think she has the ability to send them out to everyone who registered by email. So I'm very glad you could join today. Thank you very much, and you're welcome to write me with any thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take good care of everybody, and thanks Madalena for your support today. All right.